Dark spruce forest frowned on either side of the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean towards each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint of it in laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. But there was life abroad the land and defiant. Down the frozen waterway toted a string of wolfish dogs. Their bristly fur was rimmed with frost. Their breath froze in the air as it left their mouths, sprouting forth in spumes of vapor that settled on the hair of their bodies and formed into crystals of frost. Leather harnesses was on the dogs, and leather traces attached them to a sled which dragged along behind. The sled was without runners. It was made of stout birch bark, and its full surface rested on the snow. The front end of the sled was turned up like a scroll in order to force down and under the bore of soft snow that surged like a wave before it. On the sled, securely lashed, was a long, narrow, oblong box. There were other things in the sled, blankets, an axe, and a coffee pot and frying pan, but prominent, occupying most of the space, was the long and narrow oblong box. In advance of the dogs, on wide snowshoes, toted a man. At the rear of the sled toted a second man. On the sled in the box lay a third man, whose toll was over, a man whom the wild had conquered and beaten down until he would never move nor struggle again. It's not the way of the wild to like movement. Life is an offense to it. Life is movement, and the wild aims to always destroy the movement. It freezes the water to prevent it running into the sea. It drives the sap out of the trees till they are frozen to their mighty hearts, and more ferociously and terribly of all does the wild harry and crush into submission man who is the most restless of life, in revolt against the dictum that all movement must in the end come to a cessation of movement. But at the front rear, unawed and indomitable, toted two men who were not yet dead. Their bodies were covered with fur, soft crystals from the frozen breath, that their faces were not discernible. This gave them the seeming of a ghostly mass, and undertakers in a special world at the funeral of some ghosts, but under it all they were men, penetrating the land of desolation and mockery and silence, puny adventurers on a colossal adventure, pitting themselves against the might of the world as remote and alien and pulseless as the abysses of space. They traveled on without speech, saving their breath for the work of their bodies. On every side was the silence, pressing upon them with a tangible presence. It affected their minds as the many atmospheres of deep water affected the body of the driver. It crushed them with the weight of